It would have been reasonable to hope that the species of American fascist which emerged from the fetid swamps of Charlottesville in 2017 would have been consigned to the dustbin of history by now, a cautionary footnote in the long catalogue of democratic societies flirting with self-destruction. And yet here we are, nearly a decade later, forced to reckon with the continuing presence of Nicholas Joseph Fuentes, a 27-year-old live streamer whose principal achievements include Holocaust denial, the advocacy of rape, nostalgia for Jim Crow segregation, and the remarkable accomplishment of being too extreme even for right-side broadcasting network, a feat rather like being expelled from a clown college for insufficient seriousness. The first thing one notices about Fuentes is not his ideology, but his banality. Here is a young man who dropped out of Boston University after his freshman year, having attended the Unite the Right rally where torch-bearing men chanted, "Jews will not replace us," and a woman was murdered by a Nazi sympathizer who drove his car into a crowd. Fuentes pronounced this debacle a tidal wave of white identity, apparently mistaking a gathering of tiki torch enthusiasts for some kind of civilizational turning point. One wonders if he realizes that the original brown shirts, whatever their many crimes, at least had the self-respect not to purchase their revolutionary paraphernalia from a patio furniture retailer. But let us be precise about what Fuentes actually believes and says, since precision is the enemy of the plausible deniability he so assiduously cultivates. This is a man who has stated flatly that the optimal age for a wife is 16, right when the milk is good, in his nauseating formulation. He has declared that rape is not so a big deal and claimed that a lot of women want to be raped. Following Donald Trump's 2024 electoral victory, he posted, "Your body, my choice, forever," a phrase that generated a 4,600% increase in its usage online and spawned actual calls for rape squads among his devotees. His followers have adopted the acronym RKD4NJF, which stands for Rape, Kill and Die for Nicholas Joseph Fuentes. This is not political commentary, it is the liturgy of a death cult with podcasting capabilities. The question of whether Fuentes is a Holocaust denier has been settled beyond reasonable dispute. He has questioned the use of gas chambers, stated that he doesn't buy their existence, compared Jewish victims to cookies in an oven, and declared the Holocaust exaggerated. When confronted, he retreats behind the fig leaf of irony, having once explained to his audience that irony is so important for giving a lot of cover and plausible deniability for our views, specifically regarding Holocaust denial. This is the verbal equivalent of a man caught robbing a bank explaining that he was doing it ironically. The Nazis themselves would have recognized this technique instantly. They too understood that the big lie works best when wrapped in just enough winking ambiguity to provide its propagators with an escape hatch. On the matter of race, Fuentes has been admirably forthcoming, if nothing else. He has defended Jim Crow segregation with the observation, "They had to drink out of a different water fountain." Big fucking deal. Oh no, they have to go to a different school. Their water fountain in that famous picture was worse. Who cares? Grow up. In March of 2025, he offered what the New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg correctly identified as a helpful distillation of his worldview. Jews are running society, women need to shut the fuck up, blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part, and we would live in paradise. He has described Chicago as Nugger Hell, congratulating himself for the coinage, and attacked Vice President J.D. Vance for having a mixed-race family, asking how Vance could possibly advocate for an ethnic basis for American identity when there's not even an ethnic basis for his family. It is worth pausing here to observe the historical echoes. The dismissal of Jim Crow as a trivial inconvenience, separate water fountains, separate schools, what's the fuss, deliberately obscures the regime of terror that enforced segregation, the lynchings, the race riots, the systematic disenfranchisement, the economic subjugation, the daily humiliations designed to remind Black Americans of their assigned place in a racial hierarchy. When someone tells you that Jim Crow was better for them and better for us, they are telling you precisely what kind of society they wish to construct. Fuentes is not engaging in historical analysis, he is issuing a manifesto. Similarly, Holocaust denial is never merely an eccentric interpretation of historical evidence. It is, as the scholar Deborah Lipstadt has demonstrated, a form of anti-Semitism that serves to rehabilitate National Socialism by minimizing or erasing its central crime. To question the gas chambers, to make jokes about cookies in ovens, to declare that Hitler was awesome and right, as Fuentes has done, reportedly telling his own parents as much, is to position oneself quite deliberately in the tradition of those who would make fascism respectable again. The fact that Fuentes wraps this in the language of Christian nationalism and calls himself a traditional Catholic does not make it less dangerous. It makes it more so because it recruits the moral authority of religious tradition for the purpose of ethnic cleansing. What then accounts for Fuentes' persistence and, by some measures, his growing influence? Reports suggest that between 30 and 40% of Republican staffers under 30 in Washington, D.C. are now Groypers, Fuentes' term for his followers, derived from a variant of the Pepe the Frog meme. His October 2025 appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast reached millions of viewers and triggered what can only be described as a civil war within the conservative movement, with the Heritage Foundation's president initially defending Carlson's decision to platform Fuentes before being forced into an apology by an internal revolt and the departure of an anti-Semitism task force. Part of the answer lies in the peculiar dynamics of online radicalization. Fuentes targets young, alienated men, the incels or involuntary celibates, offering them what all demagogues offer: someone to blame. Women, Jews, black people, immigrants. The list of scapegoats is as old as demagoguery itself. What Fuentes adds is the patina of ironic detachment, the sense that one is in on the joke, the community of the initiated. His followers do not merely believe, they belong. But another part of the answer lies in the complicity of those who should know better. Donald Trump dined with Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago in November of 2022, and when asked about it, repeatedly claimed not to know who Fuentes was, despite reportedly being impressed by the young man's ability to rattle off statistics. Trump has since defended Tucker Carlson's right to interview Fuentes, saying people have to decide. Decide what exactly? Whether Holocaust denial is acceptable dinner conversation, whether calls for women to be burned alive, another of Fuentes' greatest hits, deserve a platform. The phenomenon of Fuentes also illuminates the bankruptcy of the free speech defense invoked by his enablers. No one is arguing that Fuentes should be imprisoned for his views. The question is whether major media figures and political institutions should amplify and legitimize those views, whether the Heritage Foundation should defend a man who says, "All I want is revenge against my enemies and a total Aryan victory." Free speech, properly understood, is a negative right against government censorship. It is not an entitlement to a platform, an audience, or respectability. Tucker Carlson has every legal right to interview whoever he pleases. The rest of us have every right to observe that in doing so, he has made himself the sanitizing agent for ideas that led, within living memory, to industrial mass murder. The irony, and Fuentes does love his ironies, is that his own biography contradicts his racial essentialism. He is, by his own admission, of Italian, Irish, and Mexican descent. His father is half Mexican. Under the racial laws of the regime he romanticizes, his status would have been, at minimum, ambiguous. The same cognitive dissonance afflicts many of his followers and fellow travelers. Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the Proud Boys, is Cuban-American, yet there he was, leading an organization the Anti-Defamation League classifies as extremist with a violent agenda. White supremacy, it turns out, is flexible enough to accommodate anyone willing to do its work. What is to be done? The conservative movement, to its credit, has not been entirely silent. Ben Shapiro has drawn what he called a bright red moral line, pointing out that the American right cannot accept a movement that is pro-Hitler, pro-rape, pro-segregation, anti-constitution, and openly bigoted against blacks, Jews, Indians, Latinos, and women. Charlie Kirk, despite being a frequent target of Fuentes' Groyper wars, has directly confronted his ideology as anti-American. Several Republican senators condemned the Carlson interview. These are welcome developments, but they are also insufficient. The rot has spread further than a few press releases can cure. Fuentes himself has been refreshingly candid about his strategy. "We want disruption, we want chaos, we want infighting," he declared in September of 2025. He has described his approach as incremental, dragging the Republican Party kicking and screaming toward a truly reactionary party. This is not the language of democratic politics. It is the language of entryism, of the termite gnawing at the foundations, while the occupants debate whether the noise is worth investigating. The historical record is unambiguous about where this leads. Every society that has indulged the Nick Fuenteses of its age, the clever young men with their ironic Jew hatred, their rhetorical calls for violence, their just asking questions about whether some people really deserve equal rights, has come to regret it. The Weimar Republic was full of people who thought they could manage the extremists, use them for their own purposes, contain them within respectable bounds. We know how that ended. Fuentes is, in one sense, a very small man, a failed college student living in his parents' house, ranting into a camera, sustained by cryptocurrency donations from followers and the occasional foreign programmer. But ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. The young men who absorb his rhetoric do not remain in front of their screens forever. Some of them showed up at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, heeding Fuentes' call to break down the barriers and disregard the police. Some of them post rape threats to women on social media. Some of them will go further still. The appropriate response to Nick Fuentes is neither censorship nor engagement on his terms. It is recognition of what he is, what he represents, and what he portends. He is a symptom of a society that has lost confidence in its own principles, that has forgotten why those principles were adopted in the first place. The answer to Holocaust denial is not debate but education. The answer to misogyny is not argument but law. The answer to racial hatred is not dialogue but ostracism from decent society. Fuentes should be studied the way one studies a pathology, clinically without sentiment, and with a clear understanding that the disease, if left untreated, will spread. We have been here before, we know the cost of complacency. The question is whether we remember,